Right, turning back now to the big story of the day, the second impeachment trial of former President Trump. The trial gets underway on Capitol Hill today with a debate over whether or not it is in fact constitutional to try a former president. Both the House impeachment managers and the president's defense team will offer arguments. So Kim Wehle is with us now to talk more about what to expect at today's trial. She's a professor of law at the University of Baltimore and author of the book, What You Need to Know About Voting and Why. So Kim, thanks for joining us. I bet you're kind of pumped because we're starting the whole trial off with a constitutional argument, and I know that's your jam right there. Can you walk us through the schedule of what the trial is going to look like? Obviously, lawmakers are busy on Capitol Hill, so they're spending the first part of the day doing some of the other work they need to do. The actual trial isn't going to start till the afternoon.
Right. And so the first part of the trial is going to be just argument on the issue that you mentioned, the question of whether once a president or anyone who's impeachable leaves office, the trial can actually happen after they leave. So that will be drier constitutional legal arguments. Then the actual trial will proceed. It will be 16 hours per side for as many days as that takes, 8 hours per day. It sounds like from the Democrat side, it's unclear yet whether we will actually hear live witnesses. We will certainly see a lot of video montage, tweets, kind of walking through all of the various events and the timeline long before January 6th in terms of the president's culpability in what culminated in violent riots on January 6th. Then there will be some deliberation and then voting. And it sounds like we will have trial on Saturday. I understand originally one of the president's lawyers wanted to hold off on Saturday for the Sabbath, but that's been shifted. So we will go through Saturday.
Yeah, I heard that as well. I think that he's just not going to participate, but it will sort of keep going. So let's talk about some of the arguments that we've been hearing now over the past few days. Since last week, we've been getting bits and pieces of what the arguments are going to look like on both sides. President Trump's legal team has argued that the president is actually being denied due process. But in a filing yesterday, the House impeachment managers pushed back against that argument, saying, look, we asked the president to come. He was given the opportunity to testify. He refused. What do you make of these two arguments?
You know, Anne-Marie, this is a really terrible argument. Due process goes back to the Magna Carta, back to the 13th century in England. And the idea was before the government, a big bad bully government, can take your life or your liberty or your property, you get some kind of a hearing. The gold standard of a hearing is a criminal trial that, you could end up in jail or even lose your life. You get a full jury trial. Donald Trump's getting a trial. So he gets a lot of process for what really boils down to, a job termination decision. Regular Americans, when they lose disability benefits, for example, that even if it impacts your life where you can't pay your bills and your children are hungry, you don't get the amount of process that Donald Trump is getting in this moment. So it's just not a really viable legal argument. People throw the words around due process a lot, but it has a very precise meaning. And given that the president was president on January 6th, he had more power than pretty much anyone in the United States. So it's not the same concern about unfairness to him taking away property or liberty or life in a way where you don't get a chance to say your side of the story. He has plenty of process here.
So as we mentioned, the president's attorneys plan on arguing that it's unconstitutional to impeach a former president. And I think, in the Constitution, when the framers sort of hammered out what an impeachment was and what rose to the level of impeachment, they do say president as well as sort of other members of office. But Democrats have cited the impeachment of Secretary of War William Belknap, I hope I said his name, in the 1870s as precedent for conducting an impeachment trial after someone's already left office. How is Mr. Trump's team responding to that counter argument?
Well, their argument seems to be that, as you indicated, the particular timing of the impeachment trial is mandated somewhere in the Constitution. That's just not the case. The Constitution mentions impeachment 6 times. That's a lot for a very short document. This suggests the framers really cared about impeachment. And if you recall, Anne-Marie, because we did a lot of talking at the time, a year ago, first round of impeachment, Republicans' argument was, wait a minute, we need to wait for the election. The election happens. Donald Trump tried to end the election. Now the argument is the election's over. So it's kind of a you can never impeach argument. And of course, that can't be correct. It can't be that presidents can commit whatever crimes they want or wrongdoing the last few weeks of office because there's no time to actually hold the trial. Now, Mr. Belknap, as you indicated, he was a Secretary of War. I think the argument is, well, that's not president. That's a long time ago. But it does demonstrate that around the time closer to the ratification of the Constitution, the people that were closer in that time period didn't have any problem with this idea. And part of it is, if you could just avoid a trial, all you had to do was wait for an impeachment. Remember, impeachment is the actual charging document. So anyone could say, listen, I was just charged, I'm going to quit, and then do a complete end run around the trial part. So this is also, frankly, Anne-Marie, if this were ever to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't think this is a winning argument, but it might be enough to give Republicans in the Senate cover for not convicting Donald Trump this time.
And so we also know that part of the argument that is going to be presented by the president's attorneys has to do with the First Amendment, right? That the president, certainly like every other American, has the right to freedom of expression. What do you make of this, his legal team's argument? Clearly, there seems to be a focus on, the words that the president said in the hours or so before the insurrection at the Capitol. But also there's everything else that he said sort of leading up to that in the year or so before.
Well, as you know, Anne-Marie, I love this. I also wrote a book called How to Read the Constitution and Why. So a little primer on the First Amendment here. The First Amendment is not unlimited, right? So there's lots of things that you and I can't do. We can't yell fire in a crowded theater. We can't possess pornographic images of children. We can't say threatening statements about the president. There are limits on what you can do under the First Amendment, even as a private citizen. One of those limits is you cannot incite an insurrection, and that's a federal criminal statute. There are laws across the country. There are laws in Washington, D.C. relating to inciting a riot. So that itself undermines this idea that somehow it's automatically unconstitutional. That's number one. Number two is, again, what I said before. The Bill of Rights, these amendments, these rights that we have, they are about protecting regular people against law enforcement, essentially, and the government. Here, Donald Trump had the complete power over the military and over a massive law enforcement apparatus on January 6th. This was not a man who was worried about his speech being clipped. And, many scholars believe that because you're not talking here about any kind of a criminal penalty or even a civil penalty with money damages, the impeachment itself isn't bound by the First Amendment. It's about, again, whether you get to keep your job. We all have terms of employment. If we violate those terms, we can lose our jobs. And the argument is basically the president was mentioned as impeachable in the Constitution. That didn't change with the First Amendment, and he can violate the terms of his office, notwithstanding the First Amendment protection. So again, a very, very weak argument, but one that I think is so misunderstood in the general populace about what a First Amendment right means that it might give politically cover to the Republicans to basically not look at the facts. And the facts are what I could tell my students are the once upon a time. Once upon a time, January 6th was a very ugly day that led to multiple deaths and massive sort of damage to the not only the building of the Capitol, that is a sacred space in the United States, but the institution of a peaceful transfer of power. That's what, frankly, Trump's team doesn't want to talk about because it's so horrific. So many people were traumatized, and it strikes at the heart of the legitimacy of democracy itself. I would suspect terrorists across the globe, countries that aren't sort of friends of America liked what they saw on that day. And that's what they don't want to see. But we will see, once we get over these threshold procedural arguments, we're going to see days of that story unfold. And that's going to be hard, I think, for Senate Republicans to sit through and completely shrug off once it comes time to actually deliberate and vote.
Kim, I hope that what people remember, I hope they remember everything that you just said, but that when you talked about that, the purpose of the Constitution is to protect citizens, right? It's to ensure that those who wield power cannot abuse the power. I think if we sort of remember why the document was written, it will provide clarity when we hear some of these constitutional arguments and whether or not we're getting kind of like, whether it's being twisted, the interpretation being twisted or not. I thought that was really, really good.
It's a
go ahead,
common thing, and just promote, it actually protects non-citizens too. I don't think people understand that. It protects non-citizens. The Constitution cares about every sort of little person versus the big Goliath that is the United States government and federal and state governments.
That's such good stuff. Kim Wehle, thank you so much. Great talking to you.